any real schools for girls my age when I was growing up, or for girls of any age. There were girls' schools, but they were few and far between, and there were none near where I was living. So even if my parents could afford to send me to a girls' school, they'd also have to afford to pay for my room and board, my lodging, my food, wherever I was going to stay, because I wouldn't have been able to stay at home with them. And that was not something that was within the family means. And even then, those girls' schools, they didn't teach what I wanted to learn. I learned some of those skills, of course, at the knee of my mother and my grandmother, skills, cooking, keeping a house, being thrifty with a budget, being thrifty with a needle, sewing and mending garments, always mending garments, repairing, finding, making things grow, especially for children. They constantly get bigger, don't they? And so I learned those lessons, and the girls' schools taught how you can do those things in an even more refined way, how you can manage a household staff if you have a number of servants working for you, or perhaps how to do very fine, beautiful needlework and embroidery, more for decorative purposes and less for the good hard seams you need for everyday life. And so, well, what I wanted to learn was everything else. Science, history, more advanced mathematics. I knew basic reading and writing and some arithmetic enough to handle a household budget. But the idea that the human mind could expand further and that boys got to have access to that sort of education, and there just wasn't even a chance for girls to have it when I was growing up, was very frustrating. And I'm very pleased to hear that over the course of my life, there were great advancements made. By the time of my older years, there were even some co-educational schools that opened up. My nieces got to attend one of them. I'll get to that story a little bit later, but I do wonder, I know I asked the girls who came in before, you young ones, are you in school yourselves?
Yeah.
Is education universal? Do you teach all of your young ones? Does everyone go to school? Oh, wonderful. That is very exciting news. Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm mightily pleased to hear that, because I've always believed that having a basic education to begin with is a building block to give anyone the advancement, the tools they need to reach their highest potential, not just for themselves, but to serve their communities, to give back, especially as we're developing a young nation. We should have learned people. We should have people know what is going on and be involved. And I've gotten away with myself. I was going back to the beginning. So I grew up in Weymouth, Massachusetts, the daughter of a minister, and the daughter of a minister's wife as well, which meant a great deal of the actual ministering to people, visiting the homes of the sick, taking care of the people in the community. And my mother and my sisters and I would always be traveling to assist those around us. And this feeling of continuously giving, mothering not just to those in our own family, but providing to those around us, that's something that was instilled in me at a very, very young age, much on the part of my mother. As I mentioned earlier, I met my husband, Mr. John Adams, when I was about 15. He was at that time, for those who didn't catch the story on the way in, he was a visiting friend, or his friend, Richard Cranch, was courting my sister Mary, and Mr. Adams came along as a friendly visitor and sat in the parlor with us. And I was a bit, there's some seats in the front here.
Sorry.
No, not at all. I'm so pleased to see that we've got a great many people showing up. Well, Mr. Cranch, just to finish that story, Mr. Cranch eventually did marry my sister Mary. And their relationship, their lifelong love, the support they have of each other, truly a romance for the books. Someone ought to write a book about that. Anybody interested in writing novels. Look into Mary Smith Cranch and Richard Cranch. It's like a story. Well, after Mr. Adams met me as a younger woman and didn't quite like me, eventually we had enough time to realize that we had a good deal in common and found similar values in each other and wanted to establish the same sort of life. So we were wed in my father's household by my father. He was the minister. So wed in the Smith parsonage in Weymouth, and we moved into a house that was right next door to the house that John had grown up in. His mother and his brothers still lived in the house next door. So we were quite close to them a good deal of the time. It also meant that even when I was alone in the home, because Mr. Adams was a lawyer, which meant, being a country lawyer, he would travel the circuit. So he would leave for a week at a time, travel to a region of Massachusetts and help to try the court cases in the area, and then would always make sure to return home a Sunday. And then there were other times of year when I would have him longer stretches of time. But even when he was gone, the house was not empty. We started filling it with our children, of course. 4 children who lived through childhood. We also had a young one, Susanna, who passed at age 2. But beyond our own children, well, we had all the children of my brother-in-law Peter and his wife Mary next door. And of course, there were living servants who lived with us as well. There was a farmhand named Isaac, who was our savior, really the only one who kept working the farm during the years of the war. Needed him there. It was a very busy place and a lot of hard work for all of us. Even when we had temporary people coming and staying in our house, sometimes nieces and nephews, or occasionally my oldest daughter, Nabby, I would send her to go live with one of our friends, with one of my sisters, or to a family friend down in Plymouth, the Warrens. And everyone always contributed to the household. Even if you were visiting, even if you were a guest, at least within our social class, you were involved. You were made to feel welcome, but the rooms are small, and the beds are shared, and there is always a great deal of work to be done any time of year, any time of day, particularly for women. So it was busy life, but a fairly normal average life for much of my adolescence and young adulthood. And then, well, Mr. Adams did begin to develop some strong political opinions. In the 1760s and early 1770s, there was a growing tension, to put it mildly. Started early on. Mr. Adams would get into long rants about things like the writs of assistance, search warrants that the British government could use to search ships, make sure that there weren't any shipping captains who were bringing in illegal goods and not paying the taxes on them. And so he would write about that, how that was an infringement on the personal space, on the personal property of the ship owners, and he made a bit of a name for himself. He also made a pseudonym for himself when he did that. He didn't write John Adams at the bottom, he wrote Novanglis, but they knew it was John Adams. And so he began to move in some of the circles of these political revolutionaries. Some were family members. A cousin, Samuel Adams, became quite well known as the leader of what they called the Sons of Liberty. Samuel had some more radical tendencies. Sometimes could incite groups of people to violence. He wouldn't be involved in the violence himself. He would get the lower sorts, very worked up, and then go off in mobs to do things like throw 3 shipworths of tea over into the harbor, but not be there himself. Their ultimate goals were in the same direction, however. A defense of the rights of the people of North America that we believed we always had, because we were English people, and English law, and English custom, and English religion, English food, culture, clothing, language, our poetry, our history. We're English people. And as such, as English people, there is a strong need to defend your rights as English people, culturally so. And so Mr. Adams and his fellows, well, they really stood up for these ideas of liberty. And then things began to get frightening and violent. With all of these customs infringements, the British Crown decided to send soldiers to be stationed in Boston. Boston being a very small town, about 1 square mile, and densely packed, almost entirely surrounded by water at the time. It was a peninsula, and so when you have a number of soldiers move into the town, fairly highly densely packed, and there's some resentment against them being there, well, there were clashes between the soldiers and the townsfolk. There were riots. There were fist fights that erupted in the streets between sailors and off-duty soldiers. And then eventually, in early 1770, the soldiers opened fire onto one of those riotous crowds. It was a terrifying night, a terrifying sight. Mr. Adams and I, at the time, we were living in Boston. Our home was in Braintree, the area of Braintree and Uncle Quincy. But since he had this active law practice, he had a townhouse quite close to the area where that bloody massacre took place. We could hear the shots that night. And Mr. Adams went out to assist as well. There were people shouting, "Fire, fire," and the church bells started ringing. And well, when you hear people shouting fire and the church bells start ringing, you think there's a fire. So you have to go try to put it out. The town is made of wood. So not only was there the thought of that perhaps there was going to be a fire destroying part of the town, but then the sound of gunshots, the sounds of screaming. And that was also a very difficult time. Personally, I was expecting our second son, our fourth child, Charles, but our third child, Susanna, had just passed just a month or two earlier, 2 years old. I was indeed mourning, worrying about another child coming along into the world, a frightened pregnant woman, and here in this nightmare area. I'm mulling over these things because you'd asked what influence I might have had in convincing my husband to defend the soldiers. I don't know if I had too much direct influence, at least in the way of goading him to. I'd say, if anything, he might have had to overcome seeing my anguish and anxiety and fear of the time, and see that to defend the soldiers in court, which he did do, was to stand for their rights as Englishmen. You see, the people of Boston erupted in fury when the soldiers fired into the crowd. If they'd been left to their own devices, if cooler heads had not prevailed, and if the town leaders, both loyalist and rebel, if they had not quieted the mob and quickly moved the soldiers to Castle William, an island in the harbor, to get them away from the townspeople, there would have been mobs stringing those soldiers up. So thank goodness cooler heads did prevail, and a trial was put forward. Because there'd also been this idea that the American colonies were not law-abiding enough, that we didn't have a firm enough sense of English justice and the laws to actually be able to have real trials and to handle cases ourselves, to stand up for our own rights as Englishmen. They eventually, during many of the transgressions later, took away the rights of Massachusetts courts to try trials. And so if you I had to go all the way to England to have your trial happen. So if anyone was to speak in your defense, they also had to travel along. So, yes, eventually it did get into that branch. But Mr. Adams, who was not the only defender of the soldiers, but one of the main defense, well, he said, if there is going to be a punishment for the soldiers firing into the crowd, we want to find out exactly what happened. And we want that punishment to actually fit the crime. And we want to establish what kind of crime was done, what motive there was for it, what the extenuating circumstances were, to have a full idea of what happened. Full idea of what happened turned out to be a much more complicated picture than was originally communicated. The first few days, the stories that made their way through town of people who had not witnessed it themselves, and some of the stories of people who had witnessed it, made it sound as if a poor, indefenseless crowd of children had been shot straight into by soldiers who were merciless, and that the captains were aiming them to fire. But in reality, the officers were attempting to stop anything from happening. The soldiers were being besieged by rather dangerous, violent people milling about them. Many of these soldiers were young men so far from home, and they have almost no power or agency themselves. And, well, something happened, a musket fired, and after that first sound, the other muskets fired, and 5 people were killed in the crowd. There's nothing to pretend did not happen. But there were reasons that it happened. And so with the defense of Mr. Adams and the co-counsel that, well, those soldiers, all but 2, were completely acquitted of the crime, found not guilty because of the circumstance they'd been in. 2 of the soldiers were found guilty of manslaughter. And as such, they did this thing called pleading the writ of the clergy. This is a very old rooted thing in English law. Comes from the time when only the educated priests and men of God would be the ones who could read and write and such. And so it was a test. If you could read a certain passage of the Bible, you could plead the writ of the clergy, and it would give you sort of a one get out of jail free card for that. But in order to get out of jail free and make sure that you only got that one, if you pled benefit of the clergy, and that was granted, you did get branded on the thumb with an M for manslaughter. And so for the rest of your life, if any should go to shake your hand, should see you handling anything and see that they would know that crime. And should it happen again, there is no second opportunity for that. Now, that was centuries and centuries back. And so by this time, in 1770, most of the people, including the soldiers, knew how to read and write and were able to claim the writ of clergy. And so that's why they had that lowered down. So you've got a question?
Yeah. Were you alive when that thing happened, where they used to put the M on your hand?
I was, yes. I didn't see it myself, see that being carried out, but that's what happened to the 2 soldiers who were found guilty after that trial. And so that was still used at that time. So, well, it was a tense time for our family as well, because Mr. Adams, doing a very just legal thing, standing up for the laws and rights of these people, I wouldn't say we became enemies to the town, but there were some bad feelings. Many of our neighbors detested the soldiers and didn't care whether there had been circumstances that caused them to fire into the crowd. And luckily, again, cooler heads prevailed. There was a slight period of lighter peace. After the soldiers were removed, the trial was concluded. There weren't soldiers in the town for a few more years, and then eventually it was a deal of commerce that led to the outbreak of more hostility, the destroying of tea in Boston Harbor in December of 1773, which many people, many myself, perhaps is a bit overboard. Literally. Mr. Adams did not participate in the tea destruction, nor even Samuel himself personally. Cousin Samuel Adams rather made sure he was visible elsewhere in the town while the tea was being destroyed, so he'd have that alibi. But it was such a massive change, massive turning point. There was nobody in all of British North America who could ignore the fact that all of that tea and that enormous amount of property owned by the British government, because Parliament had taken over control of the East India Company because of a matter of commerce, that had all been destroyed by the hands of rebellious people in Boston. So, I might not have agreed necessarily with their means, but there was no denying that it was a turning point. Mr. Adams wrote about it and referred to it as an epocha in history. Man should never rise having claimed he has done something unless it is something to such a magnitude as this. Well, Britain's reaction after the tea destruction was very harsh. They sent 4,000 soldiers to live in Boston with the townspeople. By the way, the total adult population of Boston at the time is about 1,600. Sorry, 16,000. My apologies. So there is still, it's a, essentially for every 2 adult men in Boston, there is a soldier stationed in town. They take away the power of Massachusetts courts. They revoke the Massachusetts charter. They, a whole series of acts called the Intolerable Acts. Many of the leaders of the revolution flee into the countryside, and other colonies begin to come to the aid of Boston. After the closure of Boston's port, and after all of those soldiers are sent to live in Boston, well, the other colonies start to think if they can do that in Boston, they can do it in Richmond, they could do it in New York, they could do it in Charleston. And so delegates from almost all of the colonies, all but one for the First Continental Congress, met in Philadelphia, sending representatives to discuss how to work together as a united group of colonies. This hadn't happened before. Certainly not anything that encompassed all of the British colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America. We'd had smaller gatherings before, the Dominion of New England and such, where it was mostly about a joint defense. It would be for the period of time of a war or a battle or a skirmish against a native population. And then that union would dissolve again, and you'd go back to being Massachusetts and Connecticut and New Hampshire. And the idea that all of the colonies would send representatives to a continental congress, that was very, very exciting. And Mr. Adams was selected to be one of those delegates from Massachusetts. And so in fall of 1774, he went to that First Continental Congress and met with others there, and they tried to extend an olive branch to the king and to Parliament. Tried to say, well, this is what we have done to try to defend our rights. Here is where we think the system has broken down. And we love our king, and we love England, and we are very proud to be English, and please, if there is any way for us to reconcile and fix this broken system, please, can we move forward? And the response to the olive branch petition was essentially no. The British colonies are in a state of rebellion, and there is no going back. And so by the next spring, When the militias out in the countrysides had begun to gather weapons and ammunition in case any of the soldiers stationed in town went to steal those weapons and ammunition. In April of 1775, the British soldiers did leave where they were encamped in Boston and headed out towards Concord, where they knew there was a large stockpile of cannons and muskets and gunpowder, things the militias were using. They marched out soldiers to attempt to steal it, and the Lexington militia stood in their way. In the early morning hours of April 19, again, shots were fired. The British soldiers fired at the Lexington militia fired back, and when the dust cleared, there were 8 men from Lexington dead on the ground, and the British soldiers continued their march down the road toward Concord. But the sound of those shots firing and the knowledge that there were all of those soldiers marching out toward Concord had spread through the countryside. And all of the other militias surrounding began to come to the Bay Road on the way to Concord. And the Concord militia and the other militias were able to stand at Northbridge and Concord and prevent the soldiers from getting to the stockpile of weapons and ammunitions. They managed to turn the redcoat soldiers around and send them back down the road all the way to Boston, and throughout the rest of the day, militias from all over Massachusetts showed up on the road and fired at the soldiers and chased them all the way back, which of course led to the Bay Road between Boston and Concord, a bloodbath. Battlefield. Terrible losses on both sides that day, though the British suffered massive losses. And from that day, the British soldiers who were in Boston were kept in Boston. That period of time is known as the Siege of Boston, because the militias in the countryside would not let those soldiers go back out into the countryside again. Eventually, in March of 1776, almost a year later, the British soldiers got on ships and left for other ports, because at that time the war had spread to elsewhere. But that's how we launched into that war. And all the time, Mr. Adams is away in Philadelphia. Some of the longest, most prolonged absences he's ever had from me. Whereas he would always before be home a Sunday after riding the circuit for the week. These months on end I spent without him. Really, the fastest we could ever get a letter to travel between Philadelphia and Massachusetts was 10 days. And that was astonishingly short when that happened. Everything had to align perfectly. There were some times where it would be weeks before letters would arrive, or if they did arrive, we always had to send notes to each other. I've received 7 letters to you, and this letters from you since you last left home. I hope that's the number you've written to me at this point. And there were letters that got intercepted as well. In a time of war, diplomatic correspondence is, well, likely to get read if it's found. Luckily, there was nothing that Mr. Adams ever wrote down that was discovered because of mail theft. There was a state secret. There were some embarrassing things for us, however. They were personal letters most of these times, the things that he was writing to me. And so once has anyone heard of General Charles Lee? I hear a chuckle here and there. Does he have a bit of a... History may not have remembered General Charles Lee all that favorably, and neither did I, and neither did Mr. Adams. He wrote to me a letter, it's early 1776, complaining about General Lee and how everywhere he went, he was followed around by this pack of dogs. He brought his hunting dogs along with him everywhere he went, and so he's writing to me about the people he encounters, speaks somewhat deridingly of the pack of dogs that follow General Lee about. And then, as the wife of one of the delegates to the Congress, when officials come up to Massachusetts and to Boston occasionally, they want to call upon Mrs. Adams, Madam Delegate from Massachusetts. And I wasn't the only one to have been visited as such, but Well, that's how I came to meet General Charles Lee, make his acquaintance, after that letter had been discovered and published. So he actually was quite kind, if anything, overly so. He Mrs. Adams, Mrs. Adams, oh, I'm so very excited to meet you. Oh, there is someone I need to introduce you to. And he brings me over to a seat and he says, all right, go sit here. And he brings up across the chair across from me a small Pomeranian dog. And he says, Mr. Sparter is pleased to make your acquaintance. And Mr. Sparter puts out his paw and I am forced to shake the paw of Mr. Sparter. Really, the best that circumstance could have gone forward, but the point is that letters didn't always make it to their intended place, and they weren't fast enough. They weren't fast enough to us to keep in touch with each other, to feel that we had heard from our best friend. Not fast enough to make decisions in an active point of time. With Mr. Adams gone, not only did I have to be woman of the house and doing all of the hard women's work that there was, I also had to be man of the house. I had to step into managing the finances. I had to write letters of recommendation. I had to make sure that our tenant farmers in certain parts who were managing certain parts of our fields were paying their debts and duties. I had to balance things in a way that I was never taught to do. And I didn't have the time to wait for Mr. Adams to send responses back to every question. So I had to guess and do my best, feeling woefully unprepared the whole time. Some of the things I did ended up being successful. I started a small business. I utilized the fact that Mr. Adams was in a location that was getting goods on a regular basis. I'll come back to you. I know you've got a question. I do want to make sure I answer it, but I'm going to tell about this story first because, you see, I was living outside of Boston, and there weren't any goods coming into Boston. There was a scarcity of food on the shelves, even just small everyday items. You couldn't find them anywhere. Things like pins, to hold your clothing together, to hold your laundry to the line, to do anything, really. Pins, so useful, but this is a tiny, tiny, sharpened piece of metal. The head of that thin wire has been coiled round into a small ball, and the tip has to be fine. And, well, our metalsmiths around here just are not making pins, at least not to this quality or in the mass production that they are in England, where they can be inexpensive to us when we buy a package of pins. And meantime, yet, as useful as they are, they bend, they snap, they slip out of your clothing, they fall to the ground, and so soon, no pins. There are no pins to be bought. There are no pins to be found in your house. There are no pins to be relocated from any last place you might have thought there was a pin. Mr. Adams, in the meantime, is in Philadelphia, which still has regular trade and commerce. And so around this time, early in the war, I asked him, please, would you mind sending me a bundle of pins with the next few letters you send along my way? If you purchase them at a wholesale price for a good amount of them and send them back to me, I can sell off smaller bits of that bundle to neighbors, and I could make quite a profit. There's such a scarcity of pins around here. And that started a practice I kept up throughout the war as another means of income, because Mr. Adams wasn't making his income from trying law cases, and the salary he was making as a diplomat was, well, a salary to be paid by a country that didn't have any sort of national banking system or useful currency or reliable way to pay. And so I had to find the way to keep our family afloat financially. Later, as the years progressed, I'll skip over independence altogether. I think you all know about that story, right? July of 1776, Mr. Adams convinced the other delegates to adopt a declaration of independence, to say there is no more going back. Now that war has begun, we cannot put those muskets back, we cannot put bullets back into the muskets. We cannot raise those fallen soldiers back from the dead. We cannot repair this relationship with England, and thus we need to find our next step. We need to defend ourselves as our own country. Massachusetts cannot be its own country. We have to be a united country of all of these colonies come together, all of these states, our own individual nations, our own individual groups who have united together and are working as one communal entity. A Declaration of Independence, which did not end the war by any means. No, it took years. In fact, it took several years just to get other countries to recognize the fact that we were our own independent nation. That was one of the reasons why Mr. Adams had to leave to go to Europe on his first trip. Well, the natural enemy of the English is the French, and so the idea was that, well, if we're going to find any allies, any other countries that have money and might be able to support the war for independence, that it would be France. So let's send some delegates there and see if they can acknowledge that the United States is its own country and ally with us. And so Mr. Adams was sent as a delegate to France. He left and also took our oldest child with him. John Quincy was just a young man at the time. Or so during the first voyage. It was hard to say goodbye to him, but the opportunity of my child going to see Europe and be involved in those key situations, that the idea of a European tour was something that only the wealthy, educated men in England might have access to. But John Quincy now was going to get to see Paris, get to see the Netherlands, get to travel, experience ships, learn new languages. Oh, and he learned French much faster than his father did. In fact, Mr. Adams, had rather a difficult time in France. To start off with, when he arrived there, he realized that first diplomatic mission to get France to ally with the United States had already been completed by Benjamin Franklin before he even landed. And the French liked Mr. Franklin a good deal more. Mr. Franklin got along with them. He spoke French. He knew how to make them feel comfortable. John Adams is not necessarily a person who innately makes people feel comfortable. And he's not one who innately learns French either. And so not only was he feeling underutilized since the diplomatic mission was over, but also feeling terribly out of place. He came home with John Quincy less than a year later, but only stayed around for a few months before going back to France again, because he'd been selected as a delegate not for the same mission, but to then see if any other European nations might join in, if we might get funding from the Dutch, or if we get it from the Dutch, since the Spanish are allied with the Dutch, might we get some Spanish ships to help out with the naval efforts? And so he returned to England and took not only John Quincy, but also our second son, Charles, as well. Oh, and Charles really didn't like Europe either. He came back on his own, in fact, after only a few months of being there. And the letter that was telling me he was going to come back on his own never made it. So I found out Charles was coming back from England when he arrived on the doorstep alone. And the panic of what has happened to your father and your brother. Why are you here? Are you all right? Oh my goodness, my son, you've come home. I'm so happy. Wonder what is happening. It's just lost correspondence, a running theme throughout our lives. Well, once Mr. Adams was back in Europe again, he was away for the rest of the war, which didn't formally end until the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783. Which he helped to draft and construct. So he was being used on that diplomatic mission, but Never had an opportunity to go join him because traveling the sea at wartime is twice as dangerous as traveling the sea, which is still very dangerous in and of itself. And so I wasn't able to go and join him until after the war was concluded. 1784, the war had ended. Mr. Adams was still in Europe, and John Quincy had begun his own diplomatic career. He was starting to be employed as secretaries to some of the other delegates. He was traveling to Russia, and well, I decided to uproot. I left our home in Massachusetts. I left our two younger boys with my sister, my younger sister Elizabeth, who was married to a minister. So naturally, they could provide the boys education, preparing them for Harvard in these pivotal years. And I took our oldest child, our daughter, Nabby, and we sailed to France first and lived with Mr. Adams for a brief period there, and then went to England because he was sent to be essentially the first ambassador to England after the American Revolution. It's not a friendly time to be in England. It means. That was when we began to experience nasty things being written about us in the press. Not just Mr. Adams, the one who was actually interfacing with the public, but that's when my name started to be brought in. And for nothing of substance, but just noting the kind of carriage I left the house in. And oh, what do you think where the Adamses have relocated to in Grosvenor Square? And just the gossipiness of English newspapers really made me feel quite uncomfortable. But we had Nabby with us there, and young Nabby, well, she took quite a charm to an employee of John's, Colonel Smith, and well, they were wed while we were in England. They married each other in our little townhouse there. And John Singleton Copley was there as well because he happened to be living in London at the time. It was a small affair, but a very pleasant day. And then, a few years later, we did return to the United States. And while our home was still in the same place, the city had changed its name. We were no longer part of Braintree, we were Quincy. And we decided that we needed to move into a slightly larger house than the one we had left behind. At this point, we knew we would be occasionally entertaining fine guests, or at very least dealing with a larger family and a bit more grandeur, and so we pre-purchased a house that we remembered in Braintree that we quite liked. Wrote to my uncle Cotton Tufts. He helped arrange the sale, and so we arrived at the house back in Massachusetts, and it was much smaller than we remembered. It really felt like a wren's nest. And so almost immediately we began to build expansions onto this house, make it larger, and it continued outward. And eventually this became known as, we called it Peacefield, in honor of the peace at the end of the War for Independence, the Peace Treaty of Paris, and then also factoring in one of Mr. Adams's legacies as the president, because we are running short on time. My goodness, Mr. Adams did become the President of the United States. You all know that part, right? Not the first one. That would, of course, be George Washington. And if the people of the Americas had it their way, Washington would have remained president all the way through until now. But he decided, of course, there were four-year terms stated in the Constitution, but no limit on terms, at least at the time. And it was assumed that Washington would just continue to be the president as long as he lived. Now, he was an older man, and as such, when John was the vice president, the person who had received the second most votes to be the president of the United States. Not that anyone necessarily ever thought that he would be that first president. Almost everyone's thoughts immediately went to Washington for that. But John said, I'll be second to no man other than Washington. I will take the vice presidency for that, and understandably so. There were one or two times when we thought that perhaps Mr. Adams would have to step in and be the president because Washington became terribly sick. And it was in those moments I realized how very much I did not want to be the wife of the President of the United States. It is a thankless job. It is a terrifying time. It is a circumstance where you are doomed to fail. Luckily, Washington recovered, and we had a few more years of his presidency, but after he decided not to seek a third term and to retire in his old age, the question came, who on earth would be the one to replace him? It was not given that it would be Mr. Adams. He was one of the high contenders, of course, but not that he was campaigning. One would never campaign or profess to want the political office themselves. No, you had to allow others to put your name forward and have your good reputation speak for you, and thus the delegates would cast their votes necessarily, and you had to be respectful, abstain from trying to campaign. And, well, Mr. Adams would have even had more votes had it not been for Alexander Hamilton, who really wanted to play with election politics a good deal, and was not the biggest fan of Mr. Adams, and convinced several of the electors to move their votes around in ways that didn't favor my husband. In any case, he still ended up with most votes during that period of time, and so he was elected the President of the United States. The first one not to be George Washington. The first one not to live up to being George Washington. It is a difficult job, and it is a lonely job, and, well, to be entirely honest, by the time those 4 years were completed, I was happy to return home to Massachusetts. Mr. Adams did the very best he could in the situation. He kept us out of war with France and England. Because by the 1790s, France and England were, surprise, fighting again, and each side essentially wanted to pull us into the conflict. The United States was new. We did not have the means to fight another war. Even though we'd promised to be allies with the French, the promise we made to those French allies, those heads of state in France had all been beheaded by that time. This was a completely different government. The French Directorate, the reign of terror had happened. And so, Mr. Adams tactfully was able to keep us out of the war between France and England, and might have had a better response for a second term if some news from Europe made its way over to the States just a little bit earlier in time. It was not to be, however. And so, in early 1801, Mr. Adams and I headed back to Massachusetts, to our home in Peacefield, and stopped writing letters to each other because we were with each other. The first time in a great deal of time we could actually be in each other's company once more. Prolonged, not with the worries of a war or managing a nation or even trying to keep a struggling family afloat, but to enjoy our time together, to read more, to examine more of those stories, to learn what our children began to learn in their schooling and their educations, and to have people come visit us in our home in Peacefield. When anyone wanted to come to Massachusetts and meet the former president and his wife, and we had our grandchildren and our children come and visit us. And while it was a note of a one-term presidency, returning back home to Massachusetts and being home with my love was really one of the finest and most relieving periods of my life. But I never spoke publicly or wrote anything that got published in my lifetime or made a personal campaign for myself. And so the fact that you're all here to listen to me speak makes me think that there may be some more of you who have read some of the letters, or at least picked up on some of the themes. Before we finish on time, it was asked, well, my plea for Mr. Adams to remember the ladies. There was a specific series of letters that the two of us exchanged over the year 1776 while we were thinking about independence and thinking about if we were to break from Britain and create a new form of government. And this is based on defense of the rights of the people. And it's based on an extension of liberties to those who hadn't had it before. Well, what could we do with that potential of a new nation? What rights might we extend further? What could we do with this beautiful, nascent idea, this spark that could become anything? And I venture to speak a word on behalf of women who, in my time, had no opportunity to get an education, hold their own property, make an income and keep it for themselves, even necessarily keep their children with them. If their husband died, many widows had to send their children to live elsewhere because they weren't able to support them. If a woman was poorly used by her husband, should she be abused? There was no legal recourse. If a woman brought property to her marriage that was from her family and her husband squandered it, she was destitute, with no means. So if there could be any laws, any legal justification that might be a bit more than what women had had prior to 1776, please can you remember the ladies while you're writing this code of laws? Be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors, because remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. I joked that if they did not remember the ladies, we would be forced to enact a rebellion and not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we had no voice or representation, just as they were doing. Mr. Adams took the joke part a little too jokingly. And his reply to me, if I recall something along the lines of, well, we had heard that our struggle here, what we're doing with this Continental Congress and this fight for independence, that it had loosened the bands of government everywhere, that children and students are growing disobedient, and apprentices are running away from their masters, and Negroes are insolent, and all of these Indians are slighting their guardians. And all forms of management and social structure have fallen to chaos, but now your letter is the first chance I've heard that another tribe, even larger than all of the rest, have grown discontented. Because now not only do we have the rebellious students and children and servants and all of that, we also have the wives who are up in rebellion against us. But the wives, after all, have the power of our hearts. They're able to sway us, and our title as master is in name only. Those of us who are sensible know that we need to go kindly and softly and fairly, and, well, we would hope that other than submitting ourselves to the despotism of the petticoat, that General Washington and all our soldiers would fight. In the meantime, I had been asking Mr. Adams to write me longer letters, more descriptive ones. That was not the kind of description or lengthy letter I had been hoping for. Of course, it took weeks for these correspondences to get back and forth between each other, and there were many other things to attend with and deal with, so I was able to cool myself a bit before writing my response to him, and it was amongst a list of other responses of things that had happened over the various weeks. But I told him, I cannot say I think you very generous to the ladies. Whilst you are proclaiming peace on earth and emancipating all nations, you insist on retaining an absolute power over wives. But you must remember that arbitrary power is, like most other things that are very hard, very liable to be broken. Notwithstanding all your wise laws and maxims, we have it in our power not only to free ourselves, but to subdue our masters, and without violence, throw both your natural and legal authority at our feet. That was the end of my words to Mr. Adams on that, but I would say it's a lifelong cause to try to extend some of those rights and some of those protections to people who had not had them prior to 1776, prior to the writing of the Constitution or even the passage of the Bill of Rights. I've always wanted more people to have more of an opportunity, not to put limits on someone just because of their sex, or just because of the color of their skin, or the circumstances in which they were born. If you provide the people of the country with an education and the opportunity and the free path to make the best of themselves, you will have the best of the nation. And so that's what I should hope that my legacy is. You've all fixed it by now, right? 250 years, you've got it on track, there's nothing more to... I suppose it's a continuing effort. I wouldn't leave it to any one individual, especially not anyone who's not writing in their own words or publishing or speaking in front of large groups of people, but I didn't do any of those things, and you seem to think that I have had a hand on the way the country has moved. So perhaps you can feel the same, and the next 250 years will move us in an even better direction. Well, we're very close on time to when I said I'd finish, but I know I want to answer a few more questions. If I've had a couple of them come up. I think your hand shot up first, so I want to get your question.
How long does it take for the letters to get to the people?
Such a good question. So when Mr. Adams was in Philadelphia and I was in Boston, it would take normally about 2 to 4 weeks for a letter to get in between us. When we were in England or in France, for a letter to get across the ocean, the actual voyage, coast to coast, 4 to 8 weeks, but you had to wait for a ship to actually be ready to go. You had to get your letter to the coastline, and you had to hope that ship didn't get captured or sunk, or even threatened to be sunk, because Mr. Adams was sending these with diplomatic correspondence, which was kept in weighted pouches on ships. So if you got caught by an enemy ship, you could throw your diplomatic correspondence overboard. And Saturn ended up with some of our best letters. But a long time is the short answer of it. I want to get your question right.
What were your kids' names?
Oh, that's true. I hadn't even mentioned that. Well, our oldest was John Quincy. Our oldest boy. We always talk about the boys first. Our real oldest was Abigail, but we called her Nabby. And then John Quincy was born about 2 years after her. And then we had Susanna about 2 years after that. Susanna was the one who passed when she was 2 years old. After Susanna passed, just a few months later, we had Charles. And then Tommy was born in 1773. And then we had one last that we expected, a stillborn girl, Elizabeth, who was born in 1777. She was our last. But I also helped to take care of a number of nieces and nephews. So, well, somebody else I consider to be one of my daughters is actually my niece, Louisa. My brother William he abandoned his family. We had to take in some of the kids for a while. Louisa, who was quite young at the time, came to live with us, and she lived with me and my family the rest of the time we were in Massachusetts for the rest of my life. She never married, but she helped to take care of Mr. Adams and myself in our older age, so she certainly makes her way into the family stories. And one more question I think we'll have time for.
My question is, what are those things on your
Oh, I wish I knew. There are a lot of things that I don't know, but I think they look like birds.
white paper?
We can ask the librarians
Let's
later.
go watch it.
Yeah, right.
Did Mr. Adams defend mutineers on a slave ship?
I think you might be thinking of the
Bible?
Amistad.
There was a Bible that was given.
That's John Quincy.
Oh, I'm
actually.
sorry.
So,
Yeah.
no, yes, not only, so I didn't live to see it, but John Quincy also became president of the United States, the sixth one, also only for one term. But he lived a long life of service to the country and was in the legislature. So he was a member of the House of Representatives and, yes, was involved in that Lady Amistad trial. So, awesome.
What was the biggest war your husband's ever been in?
The biggest, well, he never fought any battles, actually. Mr. Adams never was a soldier in any means, but the American War for the American Revolution was certainly the largest actual war that he was in any way involved in. Luckily, we kept ourselves out of the quasi-war with France later on. All right, well, I really appreciate you all coming so very much. Thank you for taking the time. And